The greatest defeat the elves ever suffered was not at the hands of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. It was at the hands of his servant. In a secret war that began with a promise of heaven and ended in an annihilation that erased their most brilliant kingdom from the face of the earth. This was a conflict so devastating, it makes the siege of Minas Tirith look like a border skirmish. A tragedy born not on a battlefield, but in a workshop, where the thirst for knowledge was twisted into the perfect weapon of enslavement. The story begins not with the clash of armies, but with the quiet steps of a single, beautiful stranger. In the early centuries of the Second Age, Middle-earth breathed a fragile peace. The great enemy, Morgoth, was defeated, cast out into the timeless void. But his will, a seed of pure malice, remained rooted in the world, and his most powerful lieutenant, a fallen Maya named Sauron, had survived the cataclysmic war that ended the First Age. For 500 years he hid, his form and his plans a mystery. When he finally re-emerged, it was not as a warlord, but as a savior. He had learned his former master's greatest lesson. Brute force could shatter mountains and break armies, but true, lasting dominion is achieved by corrupting the very soul of your enemy. He cloaked his foul spirit in a form of breathtaking beauty, an appearance so fair and wise that it could disarm the suspicion of even the Eldar. He called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He came to the elves not with threats, but with promises. He claimed to be an emissary of the Valar, the divine guardians of the world, sent to share his knowledge and help the elves heal the hurts of Middle-earth. He promised to teach them how to halt the slow decay of time, how to preserve their realms in a state of eternal blissful perfection, making the mortal lands as fair as the undying lands themselves. But some were not deceived. In the coastal kingdom of Lindon, the High King of the Noldor, Gil-galad, refused him entry. He did not know who this Annatar was, but he sensed a shadow behind the light, a chill that no fair form could hide. Alongside him, the wisest of the elven lords, Círdan the Shipwright, and the Master of Lore, Elrond Half-Elven, shared in this deep distrust. They saw a hunger in his eyes that belied his generous words. But if the greatest power in the world wasn't strength, but a thirst for knowledge that could be twisted into a weapon, where would such a weapon be most effective? Turned away from the coast, Annatar traveled inland, to the elven realm of Eregion. This was the domain of the Gwaith-i-Mírdain, the people of the jewel-smiths, the most skilled artisans and craftsmen left in Middle-earth. Their city, Ostin-Edhil, was a marvel of intricate beauty, its forges burning with a creative fire that rivaled the elder days. And they were led by an elf who carried the most brilliant and most dangerous legacy of his entire race. His name was Celebrimbor. He was the grandson of Fëanor, the legendary creator of the Silmarils, the most hallowed jewels ever made. Like his grandfather, Celebrimbor was possessed by an insatiable desire to create. He yearned to make things of unparalleled beauty and power, to match and even surpass the works of his legendary ancestor. In Celebrimbor and his people, Annatar found the perfect, unwitting disciples. Their pride and their ambition were the cracks in the armor of their wisdom. He did not need to command them, he only needed to teach them. He lavished them with secret knowledge, teaching them arts and sciences far beyond their own, unlocking new potentials in their craft. The smiths of Eregion grew ever more skillful, and they hailed Annatar as a master and a friend, never once seeing the hook hidden within the bait. Their friendship was a carefully constructed lie. Their progress was a path to ruin. The culmination of this dark tutelage was a project of unparalleled ambition, the forging of the Rings of Power. To the elven smiths, this was their ultimate achievement, the means by which they would finally realize their dream of preserving their lands against the withering touch of time. They believed they were creating tools of preservation and healing, a way to build their own private paradises in Middle-earth. With Annatar's guidance, they poured their skill and their magic into the making of these rings. Over many years, 16 of the great rings were forged in the workshops of Eregion. They were artifacts of immense power, each capable of enhancing the innate abilities of its bearer. But every secret technique, every binding spell that Annatar had taught them, was a thread of his own will woven into their very substance. He was not their partner. He was their puppeteer. Yet, Celebrimbor's skill had now reached its absolute zenith, surpassing even the knowledge that Sauron had gifted him. In secret, working alone, he brought forth his own masterpieces. The three greatest rings, forged without a single touch or suggestion from Annatar. These were Narya, the ring of fire, set with a ruby; Nenya, the ring of adamant, wrought of mithril and set with a white stone; and Vilya, the ring of air, the mightiest of the three, made of gold and set with a great sapphire. They were unsullied by Sauron's malice. They were the elves, alone. But in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie, a final, secret ring was being forged. And with its creation, the greatest betrayal in the history of Arda was complete. Sauron had taught the elves all they needed to know. Now, the trap would be sprung. He returned to his fortress of Barad-dûr, and, in the volcanic fires of the Sammath Naur, he forged the Master Ring, the One Ring. Into this single, plain band of gold, he poured his own essence, his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. It was the key to his entire design, a tool to control the bearers of all the other rings of power, turning the elves, greatest creation, into the instrument of their eternal servitude. As he placed the ruling ring upon his finger, a tremor of pure evil shot across Middle-earth. Hundreds of leagues away in Eregion, the elves were instantly aware of him. The veil was torn away. In their minds, they felt the raw, terrifying power of the Dark Lord Sauron, and saw his dominating will laid bare. They heard his thought, and understood at last that they were not masters of the rings, but merely the custodians of his chains. They had been utterly and completely betrayed. Their highest ambition had been used to forge their own doom. The shock was absolute, the horror profound. But in that moment of terrible revelation, Celebrimbor acted with a speed born of desperation. He understood that Sauron's primary goal was to control the Elven Lords through the rings they wore. He immediately took the three, the most powerful and the ones Sauron coveted most, and hid them, casting them far from Eregion's borders. Vilya and Narya were sent in secret to the High King Gil-galad in Lindon for safekeeping. The third, Nenya, was entrusted to Galadriel, who had already departed Eregion, sensing the growing shadow. In Mordor, Sauron felt the three rings slip beyond his mental grasp. His fury was beyond measure. His grand design, decades in the making, was ruined. The elves knew his plan and had denied him his ultimate prize. His guise as Annatar was cast aside forever. Now, only the Dark Lord remained. He sent forth his demand to Eregion. Surrender all the rings of power. They were made with his knowledge, he argued, and were therefore his property. Celebrimbor and the elves of Eregion refused. It was the last act of defiance they would ever make. Sauron's response was not diplomacy, it was war, a war of total annihilation. From the Black Gate of Mordor, he unleashed an army of a scale and ferocity not seen in the world since the fall of Angband. A tidal wave of orcs, trolls, and fell beasts, commanded by the Dark Lord himself, turned its rage-filled eyes west. Its target was singular, the complete and utter destruction of Eregion and the reclamation of his rings. The elves were isolated, their allies too far to help in time. Their kingdom of light and knowledge, built on a foundation of pride, was about to be swallowed by a darkness of its own making. On a watchtower at the border of Eregion, a lone elven scout raises a silver horn to his lips, his clean-shaven face pale with terror. Below him, stretching to the very horizon, the vanguard of Sauron's numberless army advanced, a wave of black iron and shrieking hatred, coming to collect a debt written in gold and paid for in blood. The horn's desperate, beautiful note was swallowed by the roar of 10,000 war drums. The war for the rings had begun. The elves of Eregion were smiths, scholars, and artists, not soldiers. They were valiant, yes, and skilled with bow and blade. But they were not an army. They were a guild, and facing them was the single greatest military force to march since the War of Wrath. But as the first wave of orcs crashed against the hastily erected defenses, a chilling question arises. Why this? Why such overwhelming personal rage from Sauron? Was the reclamation of a few rings of power truly worth this cataclysmic expense of force? Or was the war for Eregion about something more? We think we know the story. Sauron was betrayed, and his plan to ensnare the elves was foiled, so he lashed out in fury. But what if that's only the surface truth? What if the rings were only part of the prize? What if Sauron's true objective in Eregion wasn't just to reclaim his property, but to utterly annihilate a memory? To erase the legacy of the one family in all of Arda whose creative genius rivaled his own. He sought to destroy the last scion of the House of Fëanor. This wasn't just a war, it was an exorcism. Sauron, the former pupil of the Vala-Ole the Smith, could never abide a rival. And in Celebrimbor, he had not only found a worthy student, but a reflection of a creative light he himself had lost, a light he now sought to extinguish, with all the hatred of his fallen soul. His entire seduction of Eregion had not just been a means to an end, it was a deeply personal, psychological dismantling of his greatest artistic competitor. He didn't just want to rule the elves, he wanted to prove, once and for all, that their greatest creations were nothing without him. The outer defenses of Eregion crumbled within days. The sheer weight of numbers was too great to bear. Celebrimbor and his people fell back to their inner citadel, the great house of the Mírdain, the very smithy where the rings had been conceived. It was there they intended to make their last stand. But as they barricaded the doors, a new horror, one far more insidious than any orc, began to manifest. Sauron's trap had a second, hidden layer. What of the other rings? Not the 3, which were safe. Not the 7 and the 9, which Sauron had not yet found, but the lesser rings. The countless essays and practice rings the Gwaith-i-Mírdain had forged under Annatar's tutelage. Many of the smiths fighting alongside Celebrimbor still wore them, thinking them mere trinkets, badges of their skill. They were wrong. As Sauron drew near, his will resonating from the one ring on his finger, these lesser rings became conduits for his power. These elves did not turn to evil. Their spirits were too strong for that. But their wills were no longer their own. An elfsmith, ordered to secure a high window, suddenly froze, his limbs locked in place, allowing grotesque, bat-like creatures to swarm inside. Another, a master of engineering, found himself inexplicably fumbling the controls to a defensive portcullis, leaving a vital passage open for a split second long enough for a battering ram to strike true. They were not traitors. They were hostages within their own bodies. Celebrimbor watched in abject despair. This was the true nature of Annatar's gift. It wasn't just knowledge. It was a poison that had infected the very brotherhood he had built. His own people, his friends and students, were being used as the instruments of their own destruction. Every triumph of their craft was now a vulnerability. Every ring, a manacle. Sauron's army was at the gate, but Sauron's will was already inside the walls, wearing the faces of his most trusted lieutenants. Through the smoke and ruin, a towering figure strode into the hall. He was no longer the fair Annatar. This was Sauron in his true form. A titan clad in black, scorched armor, his face a mask of terror, wielding a great mace. But his focus was singular. His burning eyes scanned the hall, ignoring the chaos, searching for one person. The final confrontation was at hand, not between a king and a conqueror, but between the master and the apprentice, the great deceiver and the brilliant, prideful fool who had been so tragically deceived. Sauron raised his hand, and a silence fell over the hall, the orcs frozen in anticipation. He did not speak with his mouth, but his voice echoed directly in Celebrimbor's mind, a voice of crushing weight and ancient malice. "You have something that belongs to me," the thought boomed, cold and absolute. "Where are the 3? Celebrimbor did not answer. Instead, a grim smile touched his lips, the last defiant spark of the House of Fëanor. For here is the secret history, the chapter written in the silence after the fall. What if, in those desperate hours, Celebrimbor did more than hide the 3? What if he enacted one last, brilliant act of artistic sabotage? Realizing the trap, he couldn't unmake the other great rings, but perhaps he could flaw them. Was the stubbornness of the dwarves the only reason the 7 failed to fully enslave them? Or did Celebrimbor weave a firewall of defiance into their very gold? A final curse from the House of Fëanor. Sauron demanded his property, and Celebrimbor, in his last moments, ensured it was returned damaged. But this was a secret he would take to his grave. The battle that followed was not long. It was the clash of a god against a mortal, however mighty. Celebrimbor fought with the fury and grace of his people, every blow a masterpiece of martial skill, but it was futile. Sauron toyed with him, his black mace shattering the elf lord's sword, then his shield breaking him down piece by piece. Finally, Celebrimbor was disarmed and seized. The Dark Lord's will was a physical force, a crushing pressure that sought to break not just bone, but spirit. He dragged the broken smith to the high chamber of the Mírdain, the heart of the forge, and there the true torment began. It was a torment of the soul. For Sauron knew his victim's greatest weakness, his pride. He did not ask about the lesser rings. He did not ask about the 9. He already knew. He asked only for the masterpieces. "You learned well, little Fëanorian," the voice echoed in his mind, dripping with contempt. "But you only ever learned the notes. I wrote the music. I am the song. The 3 are a harmony I conceived, and you will return them to their composer." Under that unholy pressure, Celebrimbor's will fractured. He confessed the location of the 7 and the 9. He had to. The pain was absolute. But on the matter of the 3, his spirit, forged in the light of Valinor, held firm. The 3 were different. They were made by him alone, with knowledge that was his, untainted by the shadow of Annatar. They were his act of repentance, his hope for the preservation of beauty in Middle-earth. To surrender them would be a betrayal far worse than death. "They were never yours," he gasped, his voice a broken whisper. "You have no part in them. They will never serve you." Sauron's patience, if it ever existed, was at an end. The defiance of the broken elf was an intolerable insult. The Dark Lord let out a silent roar of fury that shook the very foundations of the citadel. He would have his rings, but first he would make an example that would be remembered in horror for all the ages to come. He brought the mace down. The sack of Osten-Edhill began in earnest. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. The city of the jewelsmiths, a testament to the beauty and artistry of the Noldor, was erased from the world. Its libraries were burned, its treasures looted, its people slain without mercy. And leading the vanguard of this desolation was a new, terrible standard. Sauron had taken the greatest craftsman of the age and made him into a grotesque effigy, a warning to all who would dare defy the Lord of the Rings. The last of the line of Fëanor in Middle-earth met his end not in a blaze of glory, but as a desecrated trophy for the monster he had unwittingly invited into his home. The light of Eregion was extinguished. But Celebrimbor's final defiance had not been in vain. His sacrifice had bought the most precious thing of all, time. Before the fall, he had sent the three to safety. Vilya and Narya were entrusted to Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, far to the west. Their power was now a hidden shield against the encroaching darkness. And the third, Nenya, he sent to the Lady Galadriel, whose wisdom had first perceived the shadow in Annatar. In these three rings, the hope of the elves was preserved. Celebrimbor's art, his true, untainted masterpiece, would endure, a secret flame burning against the coming long night. His pride had brought ruin, but his love for beauty had saved the world. The war of the elves and Sauron had begun. An age of shadow had fallen upon Middle-earth. The story of the Second Age is one of great loss, of fading light, and the long defeat of its heroes. But it is also a story of resilience, of hidden hope, and the refusal to surrender, even when all seems lost. The legacy of the Rings of Power was now written in blood and fire, a tale that would shape the destiny of the world. The fall of Eregion is but one chapter in this vast and tragic history. To uncover the full story of the Second Age, the rise of Númenor, the wars of the Last Alliance, and the ever-present shadow of the One Ring, make sure you are subscribed to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. Join us as we journey deeper into the